Good morning, everyone. Today, we delve into a particularly potent section of Nietzsche's Beyond Good and Evil, Chapter 1, Section 4. And believe me, this passage is foundational. Why? Because it directly confronts the traditional philosophical reverence for truth, a cornerstone, really, of Western thought for millennia. Nietzsche, in this very section, initiates his broader critique of what he calls the prejudices of philosophers. And how does he do it? By targeting the unexamined will to truth. Think about that. He posits the radical, almost unsettling idea that the falseness of an opinion might not be an objection to it, especially if that opinion is, in his terms, life-furthering. We'll see him employ several key philosophical methods: a stark revaluation of values, a provocative and aphoristic style, one designed to challenge our most ingrained assumptions, and, yes, we'll even see hints of a genealogical approach to understanding the value we place on truth itself. It's a passage whose reception has, quite frankly, shaped so much of late 20th and 21st century philosophy, from post-structuralist thought to neo-Kantian reevaluations and even naturalistic readings. Impactful. So, what are the key concepts we'll be wrestling with today? Well, they include Nietzsche's reconception of truth and falsity, or perhaps more precisely, his idea of untruth, the crucial notion of what is life-furthering, the idea of indispensable fictions, and, ultimately, the positioning of such a philosophy beyond good and evil. Quite a lineup, isn't it? Now, it's important to note, right from the outset, that some of Nietzsche's language here can be, and indeed has been, misinterpreted. We'll need to engage very carefully with terms like falsest opinions, and the German Falsheit einer Meinung, and that provocative phrase, beyond good and evil. Why? To grasp his philosophical project accurately, to avoid both uncritical acceptance and anachronistic dismissal. Our approach, it'll be a close, sequential reading, letting Nietzsche's own words guide our analysis. He begins with an assertion that's designed to immediately unsettle us, to really shake our foundations.
The falseness of an opinion is not for us any objection to it. It is here, perhaps, that our new language sounds most strangely.
Notice the for us. Nietzsche is signaling a shift in perspective, isn't he? A departure from a shared traditional viewpoint. This for us, it's a fascinating and problematic locus. Who is this us? Is it a select group of free spirits? Or does it gesture towards a universal condition of human perspectival knowing? This ambiguity itself challenges the traditional philosophical quest for a universally objective standpoint. And this new language he speaks of, it's one that doesn't automatically equate false with bad or to be rejected. Not at all. Indeed, the phrase our new language, and think about the scholarly attention it's received regarding its performative implications, its connection to subsequent linguistic turns in philosophy. This really underscores the text's radical intent right from the outset. The German Meinung for opinion is also richer than its English counterpart, you know. It carries connotations of meaning or even intention, from meinen, to mean, or to think. So, the falseness of an einem could question not just the propositional content, it could question the very way meaning is constituted, if it proves life negating. And this is a direct challenge to the epistemological bedrock of most prior philosophy, a philosophy that often assumes the pursuit of truth is the primary, if not sole, legitimate aim of inquiry. Now, this questioning of truth's absolute status isn't entirely without precedent. Of course not. We might recall the ancient Greek sophists, like Protagoras, who argued that man is the measure of all things. He thereby emphasized human perspective and practical utility over some abstract, objective truth. But Nietzsche, he pushes this line of thought into new, far more radical territory. He's effectively subordinating epistemology to a kind of vitalistic axiology, a profound shift. So, what then is the criterion, if not truth? What's the new measuring stick? Nietzsche immediately provides his alternative.
The question is, how far an opinion is life-furthering, life-preserving, species-preserving, perhaps species-rearing?
Here, the traditional epistemological question, is it true, is supplanted, pushed aside, by a pragmatic, almost biological one. Does it serve life? This concept of life-furthering, Lebensfördernd in German, this becomes paramount, absolutely central. And Leben, life, for Nietzsche, well, it isn't mere biological survival, not by a long shot. It encompasses vitality, flourishing, the qualitative richness of lived experience. But think about this, the status of life itself as an ultimate criterion. Is it an unproblematic given? Or is it too an interpreted construct, susceptible to the very critique Nietzsche levels elsewhere? That's a crucial question, isn't it? And it's precisely this ambiguity around life as a ground for value that keeps Nietzschean ethics a vibrant area of contemporary debate, forcing us, really, to confront the very nature of foundational concepts in axiology. It's a standard that evaluates ideas based on their consequences for this broader vitality. And then comes the truly provocative development of this idea. Listen closely.
And we are fundamentally inclined to maintain that the falsest opinions, to which the synthetic judgments a priori belong, are the most indispensable to us.
This is a crucial moment, a really pivotal point. He claims not just that some false opinions might be useful, but that the falsest ones, yes, the falsest, most indispensable. What on earth could he mean by falsest opinions in this context? Well, he gives us examples. Synthetic judgments, a priori. And this, my friends, is a direct engagement with Immanuel Kant. For Kant, remember, synthetic a priori judgments, like every event has a cause, or the principles of mathematics, were fundamental. They were universally valid structures of human understanding that make coherent experience possible, indispensable. Nietzsche seems to accept their indispensability, but then he radically reframes their status. He turns it on its head. It's worth noting here that interpretations of Nietzsche's relationship with Kant have evolved significantly. We've moved from seeing him as a purely anti-Kantian figure to more nuanced readings, like those found in contemporary neo-Kantian approaches that explore how Nietzsche radicalizes Kant's critique of reason, pushing the very boundaries of transcendental philosophy. He continues, clarifying these falsest opinions. And this is key.
That without a recognition of logical fictions, without a comparison of reality with the purely imagined world of the absolute and immutable, without a constant counterfeiting of the world by means of numbers, man could not live, that the renunciation of false opinions would be a renunciation of life, a negation of life.
So, what are these falsest opinions then? They include logical fictions, the imagined world of the absolute and immutable, and the constant counterfeiting of the world by means of numbers. Now, it's incredibly useful here, crucial, in fact, to distinguish Nietzsche's use of Falsheit, that's falseness, incorrectness, counterfeit nature, for these opinions, from Unwahrheit, untruth, lack of truth, which he'll soon use as a feat, condition of life. See the difference? Falsheit implies an active counterfeiting, a Fälschung, a constructed artifice, a deliberate shaping. This notion of an active, constructive falsification, well, it resonates deeply with later post-structuralist thought, particularly with Foucault's understanding of truth as an effect of discursive practices, or Derrida's deconstruction of truth's metaphysical presuppositions. These are not false in the sense of a simple factual error, like saying Paris is in England. No. Rather, Nietzsche is suggesting that these are fundamental constructs, perhaps fictions from the perspective of an ultimate, unmediated reality, if such a thing were even accessible to us. But they are fictions that are absolutely necessary for human beings to navigate the world, to think, to survive. Indispensable, he says. And here's a key methodological challenge when reading Nietzsche, attending to such subtle, yet crucial distinctions in his terminology, like this very one, between Falsheit and Unwahrheit. Why? Because they often unlock deeper layers of his critique. Logic, mathematics, even the very idea of a stable, ordered reality. These are, for Nietzsche here, indispensable tools, frameworks that allow us to live, even if they don't perfectly mirror some thing in itself. Of course, the analytic tradition, for instance, would rigorously scrutinize the logical status of these falsest opinions, asking, can they truly be false in a coherent sense while also being indispensable? A fair question, and one that sparks debate. And this is where we can explicitly identify one of Nietzsche's core philosophical methods, the revaluation of values. Yes, he's taking the traditional hierarchy, where truth sits enthroned at the apex, and he's attempting to invert it, or, at the very least, to radically order it. He demotes truth from its absolute status and promotes life-ferning as a higher, or perhaps more fundamental criterion. This move, it inextricably links epistemology with axiology, challenging the traditional separation of these subdisciplines. A revolutionary act. Now, one productive way to engage with such a radical revaluation is to actively test its application. Think about this. Consider, for instance, how you might revalue a common societal value, perhaps wealth, or even knowledge itself. How, by proposing a different primary criterion for its worth, moving beyond its conventional justification. This very exercise highlights something crucial. Philosophical values are not immutable. They are open to critical examination and reprioritization. And that is precisely Nietzsche's philosophical modus operandi here. He's changing the very currency of evaluation. Now, how do we interpret this claim about falsest opinions being indispensable? It's a tough one. One strong interpretation, which we can call the pragmatic perspectivist interpretation, suggests that Nietzsche isn't advocating for believing demonstrable falsehoods in our daily lives. Not at all. Rather, falseness here refers to a lack of correspondence with an unknowable, ultimate reality. These falsehoods, like logic or mathematics, they are true in a pragmatic, life-serving sense. They work. They allow us to organize experience and function effectively. This reading emphasizes the constructed nature of human reality and knowledge systems, valuing them for their utility. And it aligns beautifully with Nietzsche's broader perspectivism, the idea that all our knowledge is from a particular perspective, shaped by our needs and capacities as a species. This has clear affinities, doesn't it, with the American pragmatist tradition. Thinkers like William James, who, often developing their ideas contemporaneously, though largely independently of Nietzsche's direct influence until much later, also linked the value of an idea to its practical consequences. Naturalistic readings of Nietzsche often pick up on this thread, seeing these falsest opinions as necessary cognitive simplifications for organisms. Vital tools. Another, related interpretation emphasizes radical epistemological skepticism. Here, Nietzsche might be expressing a profound doubt, a really deep skepticism, about our ability to access any true reality. All our fundamental cognitive tools are, in this view, fabrications, pure constructions. And because these fictions are indispensable for life, the entire traditional philosophical project of seeking absolute truth is simply misguided. Philosophy, then, must shift its focus. It must turn to understanding the conditions of life and creating values that affirm it, even if these values are based on what, from an absolute standpoint, might be considered untruth. However, we must confront a tension here, mustn't we? Nietzsche makes strong, seemingly truth-asserting claims about the indispensability of falseness. So, is this meta-claim itself a truth in the traditional sense? Or is it another life-furthering falsehood? This self-referential challenge is Nietzsche's own claim about life-furthering falsehoods, itself a falsehood or a truth. This isn't nearly a gotcha point. Not by a long shot. It reflects a profound tension within perspectivism itself, a tension that Nietzsche scholars continue to grapple with extensively. It's a live wire. Now, what is generally not a well-supported interpretation? It's the idea of a literal embrace of deception. The notion that Nietzsche is simply saying, it's better to lie than to tell the truth in an everyday sense. This just misses the mark. It ignores his specific examples, logic, numbers, synthetic a priori judgments, which are hardly lies in the ordinary sense, are they? They're fundamental cognitive structures. It also misses the crucial qualifier life-furthering and the aim of establishing a new evaluative framework, not mere amorality. It's crucial to remember that the history of Nietzsche reception, particularly in the early 20th century, before more rigorous scholarly additions and analyses became widespread, shows how easily such misreadings can lead to problematic appropriations, often severing his ideas from their specific philosophical context. Context is king. The claim that these falsest opinions are the most indispensable is certainly one of the most potentially problematic elements in this passage. Especially today, in our contemporary context, grappling as we are with post-truth and alternative facts. Let's be honest, Nietzsche's ideas here are frequently, if often superficially, invoked in these discussions, and this makes rigorous philosophical analysis all the more urgent, doesn't it? It's crucial, therefore, to engage with this responsibly. We must employ careful hermeneutics, analyzing what Nietzsche means by false, as human constructs, remember, not necessarily deliberate lies or empirical errors, and indispensable. Left single, M-4, human cognition and species survival. Conceptual analysis helps us distinguish between different types of truth: empirical truth, logical consistency, metaphysical truth, pragmatic utility. Nietzsche is primarily engaged in a philosophical critique of the metaphysical status of certain foundational concepts. He's not advocating for everyday dishonesty or the rejection of science. Not at all. His focus is on the conditions of possibility for human experience. Life-furthering for Nietzsche is a complex concept, deeply tied to his broader philosophy, not a simple utilitarianism that justifies any useful lie. And even with the most careful analysis, these passages remain profoundly challenging. They truly do. Acknowledging this complexity isn't a weakness. Oh no, it's a testament to the depth of Nietzsche's critique and the enduring difficulty of the philosophical problems he unearths. Problems that many traditions continue to wrestle with in different forms. Indeed, by characterizing his own philosophy as dangerous, Nietzsche acknowledges something vital. This method of radical revaluation could be profoundly destabilizing if not coupled with the creation of new, life-affirming values. A warning, perhaps. This leads us beautifully to another methodological point: identifying necessary fictions or engaging in what we might call a critique of foundational concepts. Nietzsche calls logic Kant's synthetic a priori judgments and numbers falsest opinions or fictions. Yet, and this is the kicker, indispensable. So, how can this be? In what sense might something like 1 + 1 = 2 or the rules of logic be considered false from a certain philosophical perspective? Perhaps, as he suggests, because they don't exist independently in nature, but are human constructs. And why then would they still be indispensable for us to live and think? Think of a map. A simple map. Is a map the territory itself? Of course not. It's false in that sense. It's paper, not land. But it's an indispensable fiction for navigating that territory, isn't it? Nietzsche is suggesting that some of our most basic ways of thinking are like these maps. Not perfect copies of reality, no, but essential tools for living. And this implies something profound about philosophy itself. It might be understood less as discovery and more as a creative, constructive, or even artistic enterprise. One that shapes perspectives rather than merely mirroring reality. Our very language, in this view, doesn't just represent reality. It actively constitutes the world we experience, blurring the lines then between philosophy of language and ontology. A powerful idea. So, let's try to summarize this incredibly dense first part of his argument. What has Nietzsche done? He's challenged the absolute primacy of truth. He's proposed life-furthering as a new evaluative criterion. And, this is central, he's argued that certain fundamental cognitive structures, though perhaps false in some ultimate metaphysical sense, are utterly indispensable for life. The renunciation of these false opinions, he claims, would be a renunciation of life itself, a negation of life. Powerful stuff. This brings us to his next move, a single powerful sentence presented in the original in all capital letters for maximum emphasis. A declaration, really.
To recognize untruth as a condition of life, that is certainly to impugn the traditional ideas of value in a dangerous manner.
This is a stark summary, isn't it? And a bold declaration. The capitalization itself is a rhetorical device. It's an enactum of the radical break being announced. To accept that untruth, and notice, it's Unwahrheit this time, pointing perhaps to a more fundamental deviation from, or even absence of, metaphysical truth. To accept that these necessary fictions, these life-serving constructs, are a fundamental condition of life. Well, that is, as he says, to attack traditional ideas of value. And what are these traditional ideas? The German had the conditions of the simple sacrifice, and many of them, Friedrich has a whine to say. The sacrifice is the underworld's trishy, skillful. The democratic heritage has undercome and ended perhaps totally unexamined nature. Primarily, the absolute value of truth, and of course, the moral systems built upon such an absolute sacrifice. And he acknowledges this is dangerous, gefährlicherweise. This rhetoric of danger frames his entire enterprise as a courageous, risky transgression. Dangerous to whom, you might ask? Well, dangerous to the established order, certainly. Dangerous to philosophical complacency, perhaps even dangerous to the philosopher who dares to think it. Indeed, this notion of untruth as a condition of life, a necessary obscuring that enables appearing, it finds echoes in later phenomenological and existential traditions. For instance, one might cautiously draw parallels to Heidegger's thinking on aletheia as unconcealment. Fascinating connection. And the consequence of such a recognition, what happens then?
And a philosophy which ventures to do so as thereby alone placed itself beyond good and evil.
And there it is. Here, the epistemological argument about truth and falsity is explicitly linked, and this is pivotal, to the ethical and meta-ethical concept of being beyond good and evil. This phrase, it's the title of the book, of course, and absolutely central to Nietzsche's entire project. But what does it mean? It does not mean, as is so often caricatured, an embrace of amorality or some kind of license to be evil. Not a chance. Rather, it signifies a philosophical standpoint that transcends or critically reevaluates conventional moral dichotomies. Those specific, historically conditioned values of good and evil, and, crucially, the metaphysical assumptions, like the absolute value of truth, that underpin them. It's a move towards creating a different, life-affirming set of values. And this is key. This beyond is not some neutral, value-free space. Oh no, it's a reterritorialization of value, performatively achieved by the philosophical act of critique itself. Think about the power in that. This is a moment for us to consider Nietzsche's use of provocative statement and philosophical positioning. Why does he use such strong, capitalized language here? What does he mean by dangerous manner? And what does it truly signify for a philosophy to place itself beyond good and evil? Nietzsche isn't just subtly suggesting an idea. He's planting a flag. He's declaring a radical departure. This is a rhetorical strategy, yes, but it's also a way of defining his own philosophical project in stark opposition to existing traditions. He's effectively stepping outside the established playing field of philosophical morality to propose a new game, a game with entirely different rules and goals. His method here involves philosophy as not just systematic argumentation, it's also diagnosis, it's provocation, and yes, it's even performance. Now, the claim that such a philosophy places itself beyond good and evil is, undoubtedly, another historically charged and potentially problematic statement. It has been misused, tragically misused, to justify nihilism or even atrocities, particularly in some ideologically driven interpretations prominent in the early to mid-20th century. It's a testament to the painstaking work of scholars like Walter Kaufmann and many since that a more nuanced understanding now largely prevails, distinguishing Nietzsche's critique from crude antinomianism. Nevertheless, the precise scope and positive content of a philosophy beyond good and evil, well, that remains a significant point of interpretive tension and ongoing scholarly debate. Let's be clear on that. Responsible scholarly engagement requires us to clarify that beyond good and evil, for Nietzsche, is not about becoming evil or abandoning all values. Far from it. It's about critiquing a specific set of inherited values, good and evil, as defined by what he elsewhere calls a life-denying, slave morality, and striving, instead, to create values that are good and bad from a different, life-affirming perspective. It's a call for a transvaluation of value, not an abolition of value, a crucial distinction. Implicitly, in questioning the origins and unquestioned authority of traditional ideas of value, Nietzsche is also hinting at what will become a more developed genealogical inquiry in his later works. By treating the value of truth not as self-evident, but as something whose authority can be questioned, he opens the door to asking, why did humanity come to value truth in this specific way? What historical and psychological conditions gave rise to this valuation? This passage doesn't perform that genealogy, not explicitly, but it certainly prepares the ground for it by destabilizing the very foundations upon which those traditional values rest. Foucauldian scholarship, for example, has powerfully demonstrated how this genealogical lens can be used to analyze the formation of knowledges and subjectivities, exposing the contingent origins and power-laden nature of the will to truth. Food for thought. So, let's synthesize what we've seen in the short but incredibly dense section. Nietzsche has launched a radical assault, a full frontal attack, on the traditional philosophical veneration of truth. He argues that the falseness of an opinion is not an intrinsic objection to it. Not at all. Instead, he proposes life furtherance as the primary criterion for evaluating opinions. And crucially, he contends that what he terms the falsest opinions, those fundamental cognitive constructs like logic, mathematics, and Kantian synthetic a priori judgments, are, in fact, the most indispensable for human life. To recognize this untruth as a condition of life is, for Nietzsche, to impugn traditional ideas of value, and to position one's philosophy beyond good and evil. A breathtaking sweep of an argument. Throughout all of this, we've seen the concept of truth and falsity evolve from a simple binary into a complex interplay where untruth, as necessary fiction, can be, paradoxically, life-sustaining. The concept of life furthering has been introduced as the new evaluative standard, a new gold standard, if you will. Traditional values have been directly, forcefully challenged, and the notion of being beyond good and evil has emerged as the philosophical space one occupies when undertaking this radical revaluation. The indispensable fictions, those are the concrete examples of the untruths that make life possible, all interconnected. We've also explicitly identified and discussed several of Nietzsche's key philosophical methods, haven't we? The revaluation of values, the critique of foundational concepts, or the identification of necessary fictions, his use of provocative assertion and philosophical positioning, and, bubbling just beneath the surface, an incipient genealogy. We've also touched upon how his work challenges the very nature of philosophy itself, transforming it from mere truth-seeking to a form of life evaluation, symptomatology, and perhaps even creative artifice. Philosophy as art? What a thought! So, as we move forward in Beyond Good and Evil, what can we expect? Well, we can expect Nietzsche to continue this relentless project of dissecting the prejudices of philosophers. Having laid this explosive groundwork by challenging the value of truth itself, he will undoubtedly examine other cherished philosophical assumptions. He'll look at their motivations, their language, and the specific doctrines they uphold, always with that keen eye asking, how do these serve or fail to serve life? The journey continues. Now, for our next session, I'd like you to really chew on these questions. Think about them deeply. First, if we accept, even provisionally, Nietzsche's argument that some falsities, in his specific sense of indispensable cognitive constructs, are necessary for life, what are the implications for our understanding of scientific inquiry, ethical reasoning, or even everyday decision-making? How might we navigate a world where the will to truth is no longer the unquestioned guiding principle? Second, Nietzsche asserts that his new language sounds most strangely. How does the style of this passage, its aphoristic, declarative, and provocative nature, contribute to or enact its philosophical claims? In what ways does the form of Nietzsche's writing here embody the danger he attributes to his philosophy? Third, considering Nietzsche's claim that we are fundamentally inclined to maintain that the falsest opinions are the most indispensable to us, how does this challenge or reconfigure the relationship between epistemology and axiology? If life furthering becomes the primary criterion, what happens to the traditional philosophical pursuit of truth for its own sake? And what kind of self-referential challenges does Nietzsche's own assertion face? And fourth, how might different contemporary schools of Nietzsche scholarship, say a naturalistic reading versus a post-structuralist one, interpret the phrase untruth as a condition of life differently? And what distinct implications would each draw from it?